Now, one of the big problems with being in the United States is when things happen on the other side of the world, we have a tendency to kind of ignore its impacts on us. On one hand, you have people who really don't care what's happening over in Ukraine. And on the other, you have people who uh, think it's kind of a spectator sport that we need to choose a side on. And both these groups tend to forget that actually this is having massive economic repercussions on the United States. And so, what I want to do is kind of go over some of these repercussions so people can understand uh, why the Ukraine war is important and why it's actually closer to the center of this election than most people realize. So, the first thing to understand is the longer the fight goes on, regardless of the final outcome, the worse it's going to be for the US. Even the biggest Ukraine supporters in our government have no belief that Ukraine can win this war or even get back most of the territory they lost. Our government officials are clear that this is a winning situation because we get to degrade Russia's army with minimal cost to US lives. So, in other words, we're willing to fight to the last Ukrainian soldier. Uh, Essentially, we can lose now or we can lose bigger later. Something to keep always in mind that these people don't know what they're doing. They really don't know what they're doing. Okay, if you look at Vietnam, look at Cuba, look at Iran, look at Iraq, look at Afghanistan. These guys all have these great, brilliant ideas, and they always fall flat on their face, and they always have long term repercussions to the United States. If you think they know what they're doing now, please look at their past history, because they don't. The first thing to understand here in terms of economics is essentially the oil situation with the United States. And this is something I'm not pretending to be an expert on. This is something I got following Peter Zeihan. And so either if he's getting it correct or I'm reinterpreting what he's saying incorrect, please forgive me on that. I'm reporting it as best as I understand it. So my understanding is essentially there's several different grades of crude oil. Primarily at the extremes, we have light crude and heavy crude. Now, the United States pretty much ran out of light crude a long time ago, and almost all of its refining capability has been switched over to deal with heavy crude. Now, here's the fun part, which I would have never guessed. Oil shale is light crude. I would have expected it to be kind of heavy and nasty, but apparently it's the happy stuff. So what ends up happening is the United States fulfills its gasoline production by getting heavy sour crude from around the world. One of our biggest suppliers before the war was Russia. Before that, it was Venezuela. So uh, this has a huge impact on the price of things. So by going to war with Russia, this took this oil off the market, or at least out of the market we have access to. And this is why the Biden administration has been working with Venezuela to try to bring oil back online because they're trying to bring the prices of oil back down. So these are our two primary sources. So, and Venezuela, their oil industry is so heavily degraded, it's going to take a long, long time before they can ever supply what they used to supply. Another thing to understand about the oil situation, Russia oil production and refining depends on Western oil techs and experts. Essentially, their system, they kind of messed up on just because of demographics and the way they do their education system. They don't really have the expertise to keep their oil infrastructure running. So even if something isn't affected directly, like someone isn't blowing something up in their infrastructure, each passing day, their ability to extract oil deteriorates because they aren't getting the proper maintenance and upkeep on their system because these Western technicians are no longer allowed to go there. The longer the war goes on, the more it will deteriorate, the harder and more expensive it's going to be able to bring this oil production back online to suppress the future prices of oil. Russia and Ukraine are major wheat producers. Most of their wheat ends up going to Africa, and Africa is highly dependent on them. Essentially, when we have lower outputs, both due to the cargo ships not being able to go through, and the fact that the wheat fields are and their wheat infrastructure is part of the targets of war. This leads to lower outputs, which raises food prices. If the food prices go up in Africa, that means their ability to demand the food will start diverting grain from the United States in their direction unless the price goes up here to match it. On top of that, Ukraine's food infrastructure is deteriorating because of lack of ability to maintain it because most of their guys are stuck in the military, and the fact that the Russians are actually actively attacking their infrastructure dealing with wheat. This is going to take years to fix, and the longer it goes on, the worse it's going to get. Prior to the war, Russia was the world's largest exporter of fertilizer. The United States was heavily dependent on this fertilizer. Because of the war, their fertilizer is no longer being exported, and this has driven up food prices around the world. This can't go down till the fertilizer is back on the market. Now, this industry could be replicated elsewhere, but only at great cost. It's also not environmentally friendly, which means it's going to be almost impossible to do it in the United States. Trying to replicate Russia's fertilizer industry will take many, many years, if ever, because of environmental considerations. Ukrainians have been attacking Russian oil infrastructure, and this gains cackles and happiness out of our elite. But once again, this is going to fall upon prices to us in the middle class. It's going to take years to fix at a much higher cost of oil to the United States. Russian attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure tends to target their elements of power distribution. And these items, the transformers and other things for long haul power, are really produced at very low levels around the world. I think most of it comes out of Japan. Because these items tend to have very long lifespans before they need to be replaced. So there isn't a whole lot of surge capacity and the ability to build these things. In order to keep Ukraine running and eventually repair it in the future is going to increase these shortages. So this will make natural disasters in the US far more costly and take longer to recover from. This will most likely impact our insurance rates in a negative direction. Arms manufacturers get precedence in the US system for making orders. It's probably the same in Europe. All the raw materials required for arms and munitions are being diverted from the civilian market, driving up all manufacturing costs. Demand pricing tends to be ignored in terms of supply due to the unpredictable nature of war. Or, in other words, because the prices are going up, if people saw this as a long term thing, production would eventually be increased to meet it. However, if everyone believes that the war is going to be over in only a few years, it doesn't pay to do all the infrastructure changes to industry to ramp up this production. So as long as the war continues, pretty much all manufactured goods are going to be slightly higher in price, and it's going to continue even after the war is over. And the longer the war goes on, the longer the problem goes on. When the war is over, there's going to be massive rebuilding projects on both sides. This is going to divert untold amounts of building materials, driving up costs of all building materials. This is going to impact housing. This is going to impact building commercial buildings, building apartment buildings, etc. The longer the destruction goes on, the worse it'll be when it's over. And there will also undoubtedly be huge amounts of political pressure to help fortify the new final borders when this is all over. This is going to suck up unbelievable amounts of concrete, steel, construction equipment, and construction expertise. This is going to drive up worldwide construction costs. Again, houses, apartment buildings, uh, everything we use in the public, the hospitals, etc. There will also be, most likely, a big push to massively build out Ukraine's highway and rail system so they can rapidly move to their front in case of a new war. This again will suck up concrete, asphalt, and construction equipment, making it more expensive to repair and make roads in the United States. Ukraine's army right now, uh, depending on which source you use, has an average, the average age of their men is somewhere between 38 and 43. Think about that. Their economy is pretty much ground to a halt. The United States is currently paying for most of Ukrainians' government's employee wages. We are also funding their pension system. Casualties are most likely in the hundreds of thousands. Ukraine was one of the worst off countries in Europe before the war, with some of the worst demographics. Once the war is over, supporting their economy into the future after the war will probably be considered a U.S. prerogative. Ukraine has locked down their population from leaving the country. In the aftermath of the war, there will likely be a mass exodus. Where will they go, I wonder? Before all this, Ukraine was considered one of the most corrupt governments in Europe. There's evidence that the US government and its so called NGOs have been using it as a money laundering site for quite some time. Money spent on one thing is siphoned off into bribes, campaign contributions, and off budget operations. In the aftermath of a war, with the huge amount of aid that's likely to come for reconstruction and keeping their economy running, this redistribution of our tax dollars into other things that we don't have any idea will get far worse. Keep this in mind when this war is over, that there's going to be all kinds of sob stories explaining why we have to pony up for all the reconstruction and everything else like that. And remember, it's not out of U.S. altruism this will be happening. It'll be politicians and other members of the elite basically rubbing their hands together in glee with the idea of how much money they're going to get in kickbacks and siphoning off once it's all over. Now, the big thing that only gets talked about fleetingly, but it's really important. It could get a lot worse. Okay, this could escalate into nuclear war. Russia has more nukes and has modernized their missiles. Our so-called experts tell us, oh, well, Putin has threatened to use nukes before and he's never done it. So ha ha ha, he's a wuss, he's never going to do it. Remember, these are the same experts that brought you Vietnam, Cuba, Iran, and Iraq, and they're the same ones assuring us that Putin is too much of a wuss to step things up. I would not take a bet on this. Ending this will be the best thing we can do for ourselves. This Ukraine war is kind of the neoliberal globalist order poster child. Now the problem is if the US takes this as some sort of a win, where they walk out of this and say, hey, look, we did exactly what we said we were going to be able to. We crippled Russia, and all it cost us was Ukraine. We're going to see a lot more of this in the future. Repeat, if the United States thinks this is a win when it's all over, we're going to get more. If they get a bloody nose out of this, we may get some change in terms of our elite thinking, well, maybe we should put our own people first rather than all these global enterprises we have coming in from the fringes of our group. Ending the war on its current lines, as as soon as possible would be the best thing for all sides. The quicker the destruction stops, the quicker the killing stops, the better it is for Ukraine. If they have any hopes of being a functional independent country again, the longer this goes on, the less likely that's going to happen. Russia being able to basically dust off and start supplying the world of the materials it has in the past will be hugely beneficial to us. It can't be replaced, and at some point we're going to have to hold our nose and do it. So we might as well get it over with. So you may be one of those people saying, but my Ukraine, my Russia, we have to do something. Fine, you can believe that all you want. Just remember, it's coming at a cost. It's not a freebie. All right. So, in the comments section, please tell me if you've been seeing this election as a referendum on the Ukraine war in any way, shape, or form, or are you looking at it purely from the economic side? And again, if it's economics to you, Ukraine is part of that economic decision. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithm has brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, to check out my other titles. I get into a lot of things. I'm sure you'll find something you might find interesting. And if you know someone who might find this useful, please share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.